Hey there, it's Dr John Cummins from Executive Medicine, and what I want to talk about today is a recent trip I had to a blue zone in Sardinia. So for those of you who aren't aware, a blue zone is one of 5 identified places in the world where you consistently get people living to over 100 years of age or so. The term was, the story is it was first discovered in Sardinia, which is where I went. There was a local doctor there that identified these villages, and these villages where the men got to 110, 120, the women slightly less, which is unusual because usually women outlive men. And he presented these findings at a conference. Ultimately, a National Geographic journalist, Dan Buettner, got wind of this. And the reason they're called blue zones is because this doctor apparently drew on the map of Sardinia where these villages were with a blue pen. So since then there have been other areas discovered. Okinawa, which is a Japanese prefecture, Ikra in Greece, Loma Linda, which is the only western one, which are Seventh-day Adventists living in California, and also Costa Rica. So I'm really fascinated. How do these people live so long? But not only live so long, but have a great health span. They just don't get chronic illness. And you know, if you talk to people, they say, "Well, look, I don't know that I want to live to 100, but what I do want to do is, have great health, so not have chronic illness." So I was there on holiday, and I tried to contact some of the local university, couldn't do it. And so the funny story is I actually went to ChatGPT and said, "Look, can you find me someone in Sardinia?" So it got me to say, well, there's a hotel here and sometimes they do these tours of longevity. So I got my hotel to talk to their hotel, or the other hotel. And this woman, Paola, calls up and she says, "Look, I'm actually a longevity researcher. I've published on this. I'd be delighted to spend a day with you." And I thought, wow, this has hit the jackpot. So my wife and I drove 3 hours south, and we met Paola at this designated place. She had a colleague called Gigi. Gigi is not an academic, but Paola would be a couple of decades younger. Gigi's about my age, and he speaks no English. And what he had done out of personal interest was gone up to the hills and recreated a shepherd's shepherd's hut. So like in the old days, and when we're talking longevity, we are talking the villages that for example, I went to where Gigi lives, but also in those days, the shepherds would go off and live in the mountains for weeks at a time with their goats. So we travelled on this bumpy road for about an hour of 4-wheel drive, and got to where Gigi had recreated this shepherd's hut. It took him 5 years, built by stone with all this really old timber on top of it. They have trees in that area that are 700, 800, 900 years old. And so Paolo, we really sort of spent the day talking about why is it that we believe that people live for so long. So firstly, one question is, well, why do women live much, much less? And in her view, it's because it's a very matriarchal society, and so the women in the villages basically make all the decisions. So if you're like a 90-year-old woman or 95-year-old woman, you are expected to run the village a bit like the mayor, a bit like Clover Moore even, who's not quite 90 plus, but could be. But Paola postulates that it could be the fact that they carry more stress like men do in our culture that causes the relatively younger mortality than they do in men. And one of the first things I noticed is I've got a really bad sense of smell, but when we got on top of the hill, Gigi, we all get out of the car, and Gigi goes and rips a bit of plant from the ground, says, "Look, can you smell this?" He's standing 3-4 feet away. We're in this totally open outdoor place, and he puts this, I mean, I could smell it from where he's holding it. I was just stunned because I can't smell anything from 2 inches away half the time, but the power of this, it was time, was overwhelming. So part of the notion is that they're eating foods that are basically not processed, not grown with pesticides and genetically modified things, but also grown in very fertile soils. And it's got me thinking maybe I've never been an purely organic fruit veg person, but it's got me thinking, well, maybe I should actually try it. So what the goats do is that the other thing is the men that with the goats these mountains are like 30 degrees. So these guys are clambering up the mountains like goats and getting an awful lot of aerobic activity. You can't really walk anywhere in Sardinia or many places at all without going up hills basically. So they get all of their aerobic workout just doing their job. They also can, from what Paula says, and we're just talking about men at the moment, shepherds, they will walk for hours before having anything. So they do a lot of intermittent fasting. They eat this leavened bread, which basically lasts for weeks and weeks. They don't eat much. They eat when they're full and they stop eating. So they're really having long periods of fasting, but then also eating little bits throughout the day, which is very different to how we do it. The animals, the goats, are clearly feeding on incredibly rich herbs and grasses and things. And then when so the animals and the goats are used to make cheese. So they're milked, the cheese is made, and what they use to ferment the cheese is basically bacteria that are when they cull a goat, when a goat is killed for its meat, for example, and they eat lard, they eat total animal fat, you yet still live to 120 years of age. So again, it may be what the goat's eating. But the bacteria they use to ferment the cheeses come from the stomach of a killed goat. So you can see this cycle of healthy goat, culled, healthy milk, healthy cheese, goes on and on. Paolo, they had this beautiful fresh spring water running through from a copper pipe running through the property. The property was small. Gigi had gone down and caught fresh trout from the streams. The trout were little things about 6 inches long. There's about half a dozen trout that we ate. They prepared some potatoes that were grown in the soil, and also some green vegetables things, and basically made what they call a minestrone soup. It was very much a cheese-based soup, with a tiny bit of bone and meat in it, some lard in it, potatoes and vegetables, and that was sort of typical of what they may have out there. So the exercise is catered for by the hillside. The food, I made a point in a LinkedIn post that if you think about it, you're not actually necessarily eating the goat. You're actually eating what the goat ate. So the goat eats the stuff, maybe stays being a goat, and if the goat's killed for its meat and its cheese, what you're actually getting at is what the goat ate in the first place, if you get what I mean. So and they don't eat much, and they're lean, and they have long periods of time between food. But I was also really interested in the whole stress thing, and so I said to Paula, look, tell me about the stress in those communities. And she said, well, they really didn't have much stress at all. So even with her experience in growing up, she said, look, we just didn't have money. We were all running around bare feet. Schools were poor, things like that, but they were happy. And so the sense I get is that they have a very simple life, unlike our complex lives. I mean, you look at all the taxes we pay and the superannuation, we worry about the cars, and the cars got to go in for service. We are so busy in our brains, and one of the things that I had the sense of in these mountains was just when you're up there, I would definitely go there for a week and just hang out and do nothing. The stillness, the disconnection from electronics, you can feel the mass of the mountain. Paola goes back, and what she does is lives in Sardinia for 3-4 months a year, and goes off and does tour guides around Europe, because that's her way of generating income. She's got a calling to go back to the mountains, and I get that. But she was saying that so really, if the Sardinians have in these blue zones, have a roof over their heads and have some food in their belly, they're happy. And it just makes me think how nuts we are with all of what we do, building our houses and renovating. It's got to be the best of this and the best of that. I think we can all do with some more simplicity in our lives. The other thing she said was the sense of community, and I think this is really important because, as the US Surgeon General says, that loneliness, which has a peak in the 20s, which really surprised me, but I think social media has something to do with it, and a peak in the 70s, is as bad for you as smoking cigarettes. So she gave me some examples that when the shepherds would go out, as in kind of groups, I guess, in the hills, and they'd keep connection with each other, and they would keep connection because you can hear the bells of the goats or whatever, and also they would meet every now and then. And if someone was late, they would go searching for them and figure out, are they okay, things like that. And so the shepherd would always know that people are thinking about them, whilst they're out for weeks at a time, and relatively connected with them. So that there was always this sense of community, but also, if a family, had no money or very little food, for example, or if the whole village had very little food, and a woman was breastfeeding and her breast milk dried up, then they'd pop the baby onto the breast of another woman, who was wet nursing, who was nursing her own children. And so the community is really there to back up the individual. And I think certainly, my experience in city life is I have a social network, but it's not as powerful as that. And I think, when we watch movies of small communities, we're drawn to them often in European countries like Jean de la Florette, for example, that was out back in the 1980s. And the other thing that impacted on me, it's not that, with older people, and when you're talking centenarians, by definition, you're talking older people, it's not that they're looked after. It's not that almost debases what happens there. It's that the people are valued hugely for the wisdom experience, and that's why they are the decision makers. And I read this article subsequent to this trip, which was got back in July, where they were interviewing a woman. I think it could have been Brazil, but she was a very old woman, say 95 or something, and there was a local meeting 20 k's away of various villages and things, and this woman was carried there on the back of her son, who was in his 70s, because she was the spokesperson for the village. And so what I'm saying is that the elderly have a very important active role to play in the running of their village, and so they have a sense of purpose. They wake up with something, that they're needed, they're called for, and they're not just chucked in a nursing home. So I found it a very rich experience, an unforgettable experience. The strength of the odour of that herb, I will not forget ever. And that wasn't the only herb I could smell. I mean, it was just incredible. And it just really got me thinking, how can we incorporate this into our lifestyle? I think simplicity is one. I think eating food that has been grown in fantastic soils is another. And just this sort of constant movement. And I'm keen to talk to Paola more, and we've agreed we'll keep in contact, because I just really want to pick her brains as to how does she, bring the Western style into the Sardinian style. And we were discussing this a bit on the trip when she goes into a supermarket, that she's looking at labels and things and trying to figure out how she can eat in a very holistic sense. Because the food that the traditional people eat in Sardinia is exactly what she eats when she's there. And even I was talking to the hotel guy after this, like a day after or something, and they're about 3 hours north, and he was saying, I think all the Sardinians, they go to markets and they eat the cheeses from the goats that are in the hills. They purposely hunt out those because they feel a lot better eating those. Um, so yeah, no, I just thought I'd share my stories. I'm sorry it's been a bit long, but hopefully it was interesting for you all.